All right, so how we've started out every one of these messages is, do you think it's going to start out well for the Israelites? You guys are getting sick of this already. This is number 4 already just in this book, all right? Now, I have a question, and why is it like that? Why is it that you can have so long a time of just awesome living, things going well, and then people just find a way to ruin it? Do you guys have any theories as to why this happens? Why can you have 80 years or 7 years or however many years of awesomeness, and you'd finally start to realize, this is kind of nice. I don't like being in captivity or anything like that. Owen, what's your idea? What's your thought?
So, well, after 80 years of just prosperity, prosperity is not as boring after fighting massive amount of time.
Okay, that's an interesting theory. So you're saying prosperity can kind of be a cause for that? So why would you say that? Because I would agree with that. So why can prosperity sometimes be a reason for people to fall back into some old habits, let's just say? Gavin? They get used to what? Okay. Okay, that's a great point. So have you guys ever, when life's really good with the Lord, when life's not just really good with the Lord, when life's just really good, you don't have to worry about life at all. Do you guys have a tendency sometimes to drift from God? You guys have that happen, like when everything's going really well, and then immediately when things start to crash and burn in your life, what happens? You're like, help! Right? And there's nothing wrong with that per se, because I think those are gentle reminders for God to be like, come on, I'm here. But there is something about this idea. I really liked what Owen said. I think prosperity has a tendency for us to forget, right? Now, history people in here, we're going to have a little history lesson. When did we become a nation? Don't give me the technicalities. Just tell me. What? 1776, all right? So, all things considered, as we as a nation, have we been existed a very long time? All things considered? Now for us, we're like, yeah, it's a long time because I'm like 16, 17, 18. That's a long time, right? How many years of prosperity have we looked at for Israel? We brought up, what's the max amount that we brought up so far? 80 years, okay? When you look at history, is that a lot of time? When you look at the nation of Israel, and when you look at our nation, the United States, we've been in existence how long? About? A little over 200 years, right? Is that a long time? All things considered? That's really not a long time when you think about it historically. But all right. Anyone got some coinage here? I want to see some coinage. Anyone got some coins? Who's got some coins? You guys are Gen Zers. You're like, I don't have coins. I have stuff on my phone and Do you have many coins? All right, here we go. All right. Gotta grab this. Thank you. All right, Carter says I want this back. All right. Okay. So, here we go. So, what was our date again, David? 1776, all right? So, if you look at this coin, this is a quarter, by the way. Carter's a high roller. We got United States of America, got a sweet eagle on the back. And then we got, I forget, is this Washington or Hamilton? Washington. It is George. Is this like a pet peeve of yours? Yes. You should know the silhouettes of our founding fathers. Well, I'm sorry. Busts? I don't know what you call them. Anyways, something on the front of this coin. What's it say? What's it say? In God we trust. Try that in our culture today. In God we trust. Does that mean anything to the vast majority of people? Maybe. I'm not saying like everyone walking out there in America is an atheist, because I don't think that, right? It's like, you're an atheist, you're an American. Actually, that's what the rest of the world thinks. But in God we trust. So we've gone from a nation to in God we trust to now what people are trying to do is actually take this out, right? You guys have seen stuff about the Ten Commandments, right? How in public places our government's trying to remove places from public places because why? Why do we want the Ten Commandments removed from public places in our nation? Owen.
One reason could be that since they provide equality to all religions, that a case can be made that anyone with the money should be able to put a religious symbol there as part of their religion.
Okay, so there is an argument of religious inequality. So my only argument to religious inequality with the Ten Commandments is you probably shouldn't sleep with someone else's wife, and then you also probably shouldn't murder someone. You probably also shouldn't steal someone's stuff, right? That's to everything. Yeah, John. Yes. Yep. Yeah, so they believe it's state approved, but we've gotten to a point where that's offensive, right? Where some groups have said, I find that offensive. So they try to remove these things down. So basically monuments that people have set in place to remind us about our founding as a nation, we've tried to remove this. So you guys know now, if you look this up, I think it's the new dollar coin, right? This is stuff you guys are like, I don't even know there's a dollar coin. Well, there's a dollar coin. Did you guys know, so you know what they're trying to do now within God We Trust on this thing now? You know where they put it? They put it on the side. What's the first thing to wear away usually on a coin? The sides, right? That's kind of interesting, don't you think? What does that say about our nation? That if you were to ask any person, someone give Carter his coin back. Think. All right. If you were to ask any person in our society, in our nation, how we became a nation, it's kind of miraculous. Just a ragtag group of people that wanted to overthrow the most powerful empire in the entire world, and they did it. It was the hand of God. And it's crazy how just within the past over 200 years, right? Coming up on, what is it? It's 244, right? Coming up on 250. We've forgotten, right? And that's not a lot of time. And I would argue, kind of going back to Owen's point, how have things been in America? How have things been? Horrible? Prosperous. There's something about prosperity when things are going good, we tend to forget where we came from. We tend to forget where we came from and our need for God. And we see this with Israel over and over and over again. So guys, historically speaking, is it dangerous when we forget where we came from? Is it dangerous when we forget what God did for us in the past? Now, were we alive back then? Right? No. But it's important that we need to remember those things because those things are what got us here today. And we see with Israel, and there's no reason to think it won't happen with America, that God's going to say, you know what? You've forgotten about me. And going to bring some judgment in. So we see this happen once again for the fourth time in chapter 6. And so the people did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, looking at chapter 6. Let's read together. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And so once again, what do you think Israel does? Help! Right? They cry out, and God says, shut up, I don't want to hear from you, please. What does he do? Always listening. He brings in another judge, and it doesn't name the judge this time. He says he raises up a judge. And it's interesting. He said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, verse 8, I led you up from Egypt. That was a little while ago, right? But he's reminding them, I brought you out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice. This is exactly what happens. So then we get to this guy that is going to come along the scene. His name's Gideon. Who's heard of Gideon? Everyone raise your hand if you're heard of Gideon. Sweet Gideon. We got a cool story. So we have the angel of the Lord come in verse 11. Now this is important. When you guys see angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, do you think this is any angel? So this is actually, many people agree with this. This is a pre-incarnate Christ. Now what do I mean by that? Pre-incarnate Christ, what is that? Oh, Jesus before, was there a Jesus before Jesus? Or has Jesus always been Jesus? Jesus has always been Jesus, but I get what you're saying. So Jesus before he came along, a little after AD, like 86 or whatever, where was Jesus in Genesis? Was he there? Was Jesus there? Or was Jesus someone who came into being? Was Jesus someone that God created? Because that's what our JW friends would say, and that's what our Mormon friends would say, right? They would say, well, Jesus is someone who came into being. Is there a problem with that? There's a huge problem with that, because Jesus is, and can God be created? No, right? So, angel of the Lord, so we see, a lot of people think these appearances by the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament is Jesus in the Old Testament. So I want you guys to picture this as this is happening. Now, the angel of the Lord came and sat underneath the terebinth at Oprah, ooh, I like it, or Ophrah, whatever, which belonged to Joash, but I like Oprah, while his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, a mighty man of valor. I'd like to get that. I'd like to have an angel come up to me and say, the Lord is with you, a mighty man of valor. Well, geez, thanks, right? And Gideon said to him, please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. So, in essence, what is Gideon asking him right here? What's he saying? Where are you, right? I've heard about all these cool things you did back in Egypt, right? And by the way, is it too far long ago they were doing some cool stuff? Which story did we look at last week? Who was it? Two ladies? Deborah and Jael, right? Jael who drove a peg through this general's head and killed him, so he died, right? And then we have Deborah, the lady prophetess and the lady judge who delivers the nation of Israel, right? So ladies win the day. It's really awesome. Cool stuff happens. Was that too long ago? That's not too long ago at all. But Gideon seems to be trapped in this mindset of, you know what, I heard about things you used to do, right? Used to be all this time ago, and I'm just wondering, where'd you go? Where'd you go? Now, honest question, have you guys ever wondered that about God? Where'd you go? Why is this happening? Now, notice God's response to him, right? Now, if you were God and someone says, why'd you leave me? In God's mind, what's he probably thinking? What's he just said before this? What's he done? He's reminded them, right? He's reminded them of where they came from. Remember, you were in Egypt, and then you went on this, I did all of this for you. And if you're God and someone's complaining about where'd you go? Where you been? What would you say if you were God? Right here, you idiot. Like, right? It hit them upside the head. But God's gracious, right? And I want to kind of propose something to you guys. There's nothing wrong with asking, just like Gideon, there's nothing wrong with asking God sometimes, like, where'd you go? Or where have you been? Because you just don't seem to be around lately. And we see David ask this over and over again, and he kind of says a lot of prayers that we might think are, well, you can't say that because you're a Christian. You shouldn't say things like that. He says things like, God, why have you forsaken me? You see, we're going to see this guy Elijah at some point say, he's like, God, I feel so alone. I'm the only one here. I want to die. Right? Is God big enough to handle those prayers? Is God big, or is God some type of person who's just, if you say one thing that's wrong or incorrect, he's just going to, I'm done with you, right? Get frustrated with you. And I used to think growing up that you couldn't say those things to God. I felt like it was wrong of me to, if I had an honest question or doubt about God, there'd be this guilt factor of, I shouldn't say that because that's not being a good Christian. Guys, God can handle it. God can handle when you have doubts, when you have questions, when you talk to him, he can handle it. Because in your relationships, is it always like that? Like you have doubts or questions about someone, like if they really love you or if they really care about you? Do you, is the friendship real if you don't voice those things with that person? It's not a real relationship, right? If you can't have an open relationship and say like, hey, like I'm struggling with this, or hey, I'm having some doubts about this. That's not a real relationship. If it's a real relationship, you need to have real honest conversation with that person. And it should be no different with God. God's big enough to handle those things. And so he does that with Gideon. And so in verse 14 it says, the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you. I'm sending you, Gideon. And he said to him, please, Lord, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan, or my clan, is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am least in my father's house. So what does Gideon say in response to the Lord saying, you know what, Gideon? Let's go save Israel. Save him from the hand of Midian. So what does Gideon say? Doubt it. I can't. Because why? I'm weak, right? Like, we got the clans. Is he the strongest clan? All things like the tribes of Israel? No, it's a weak clan, right? It's a weak clan. And not only is he a weak clan, but what does he say in terms of his father's house, his dad's house?
Lowest.
I'm lowest, which means what? The last son. Any younger people in here, the youngest in your family, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? You're like, yeah, I understand, right? The weakest. Or the most spoiled, whatever, however you want to look at that, right? You're like, I hold all of the power, actually. In this culture, though, the youngest son, were they the ones that were they the go-getters? Were they the one that got all the cool stuff? No, it was all about the what? Firstborn. Firstborn got all the cool stuff, right? Now in our culture, it's like the firstborn's like the bulldozer who like paves the way for everyone, and parents make the mistakes on. It's like, yeah, I won't do that again on this kid, right? And things kind of flow down from there. But in this culture, it's like firstborn gets everything. They get more inheritance. They get all this stuff, right? And so Gideon's saying, I'm not that special. I'm not that important because I'm from the weakest tribe and I'm also the firstborn. So why would you want a guy like me? Because kind of slim pickings. And isn't it cool? Last week we looked at this too. If you're in that culture and God came up to a woman and said, hey, I want you to lead your nation to victory, is that a cultural no-no? That's a cultural no-no, right? Because women back in that day, it's like, culturally they're speaking, men are like, they can't save the day. They can't do that, right? Pigs, right? And then this week we have lowest, last, least of the tribes. God says, hey, come on, save Israel. Well, I can't, right? I'm not good enough, basically. Is there such thing as not good enough for God in terms of, I don't care where you come from. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you've done. God does not care what you've done. You could have done the worst, most horrible thing ever, and you're like, I'm damaged goods. God's not going to use me. He's not going to, because I did that. I did all these horrible things, or this is who I am. This is my background. God says, I don't care. I want to use you. I want to use you, and I want to make you, influence you, right? I want to have you influence the culture, and he does that with Gideon, which is so cool. So, he goes on to remind him that, 14, he says, go in this might of yours, save Israel. And it reminds me of James. This reminds me of James 2. James 4, it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And then later it says, a couple verses later, it says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. In this culture, too, we've gotten to a point where to get to the top, you got to what? What do you have to do to get to the top? To get to the top in terms of success in life, to get to the top in terms of getting the best job, you got to work, right? But at what cost? What about the people around you? What are you going to do with them? Right? You're going to scratch and claw, fight your way. You're going to step over whoever, whatever, to get your way, to get to the top. But James tells us what? It says, God, listen to this. There's things God opposes, but listen to this. This is a strong statement. In James 4:6, it says, God opposes. Is that a good thought? Like God opposes you? Like God is your enemy. He's talking to Christians. God is your enemy when you're what? Proud. So if any of you have a problem with pride, if any of you think you're better than someone else, if any of you think you're going to scratch, fight, claw your way to get to the top, that's pride, right? There's a pride problem. And so what does that mean? God is opposed to you. Dang. Right? Do you think things are going to go over well if God's like, I'm in opposition to you. We're not on the same side right now because you're prideful. That's not a good place to be. And instead it says, in verse 10, humble yourself. What does it mean to humble yourself? Does it mean to beat yourself on the head and be like, stupid, 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 you're so dumb, right? Because that's what people think humility is. It's like literally hitting yourself. You're like, I'm so dumb. Oh, man, like, is that humility? Right? No. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself, like hitting yourself on the head, like, oh, you're so dumb. I'm such a humble person, right? Who are you thinking of the entire time while you're doing that, by the way? Stupid, 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 stupid. Yourself, so are you? That's still pride, right? That's still pride because you're thinking of yourself all the time. So humility is what? Not thinking less of yourself, but flip the words around a little bit. What? Thinking of yourself less. So in other words, and this, guys, teenager, I didn't know what to think other than myself. I thought about myself a lot when I was a teenager, and I sound like, and I don't struggle with that anymore, right? No, I still do, right? I still struggle with pride. Like, put a percentage on the amount of time you think about yourself during the day. Like, just kind of think about average day, how much do I think of myself? And it's kind of crazy sometimes, right? If we were to catalog our thoughts, we'd realize I probably think about myself 90% of the time or more, right? And even, this is, maybe you've been here too. How many of you guys have done like a good thing and you're like thinking of someone else, and then you're kind of like picturing like a movie camera outside of yourself? Like, this is a social media world we live in, right? It's like you're giving something to someone maybe that's homeless, or you're just thinking of yourself outside of the situation, like as the person's like pouring out their heart to you, you're talking in your own mind like, man, I'm so awesome that I'm doing this right now. This is so cool, all right? And then you leave and you're like, I did a good thing back there. God, hey, God, did you see that? That was pretty, right? We've all been there, right? And that's the trick is we need to think of others. Think of others and less of ourselves. And staying in that habit, that's a habit. That's going to take some work. That's going to take some mental gymnastics, right? For you guys. It says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will what? What does it say? Whoop. Lift you up, raise you up. What does that mean? To get to the top, culturally, we have to scratch and claw. But in God's economy, how do you get to the top? You humble yourself. And He will raise you up. He will raise you up. Gideon's just a low-life, low-level dude just doing his thing, being humble. And God eventually comes along and raises him up, right? Another verse in 1 Corinthians 1 says, God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. What does that verse mean? What does that verse mean? That God chose the foolish things in this world to shame the wise, and he chose the weak things in this world to shame the strong. What does that mean? that God did that. That's how God operates. Let me put it this way. Does God pick the best in class? Look at who he chose as his disciples. They were what? White trash, right? Like fishermen, right? Fishermen, tax collectors, prostitutes. What? Look at this ragtag group that Jesus has. These guys are losers. What losers? And yet these are the people that God uses to change the world, right? And you look at anyone in this Bible, predominantly, most of these people, you would look at them and be like, if we're choosing like a couple weeks ago, we had a turkey bowl, and it's like, I was the first pick, of course. No, I was like the 50th pick, but, you know, turkey bowl, you're like, yeah, I'm going to choose Ryan Walker because he's like 6'7", and he's super tall, right? You'd pick someone like that, right? But in God's economy, sorry, Ryan, in God's economy, you'd be like, no, I don't want Ryan. I want Trevor, right? No. God's economy, he doesn't operate like that. He's like, you guys remember with David, right? Remember David? He's picking the king of Israel, and it comes up to him, right? Samuel, right? He's trying to find the successor to Saul, and he goes to Jesse, and he's looking at all of his sons, and he's like, surely it's this guy because he's so handsome and rugged and tall, and he looks impressive, and he's got speech, right? What does God say? No. And you guys remember, by the way, when it finally gets down to the bottom, is David even there? Where is he? Where is he? He's out in the fields. What's he doing? Right? He's shepherding. He's doing what he's supposed to do. Can you imagine David, that type of call? Be like, hey, I don't know, this is probably a sandal or something like that. Hey, David, Dad wants you back here. Jesse wants you back here because some dude named Samuel's here. He wants to anoint you as king. What? Yeah, that's right. He's just doing what he's supposed to do. And God lifts him up. You guys just got to do what you're supposed to do. Guys, greatness, those things come, but it comes through humility. It says God will lift you up. We see that with Gideon. And it's encouragement, right? It's encouragement that you do what you're supposed to do. You stay humble. You stay focused on the Lord. He's going to reward you for that, right? And it might not always mean you're going to get that promotion. It might not always mean, I don't want you guys to hear like, so that Trevor said if I'm just humble, I'm going to make 6 figures for the rest of my life. No, don't hear. You didn't hear that, right? But what I am saying is God's going to not oppose you, but he's going to say, you know what? I'm going to use you, and I'm going to raise you up, and I'm going to use you in a special way, like Gideon. And I love Gideon because the first thing God tells him to do later on, it says, he says, I want you to go to your go to your village, and I want you to tear down these false idols. I want you to tear down the idols of Baal and Asherah. Now, these are 2 idols that were used by the Midianites. Now, Baal, I'm going to talk about Baal for a little bit. Baal was the god of thunder. Baal was the god of childbirth. You know what they would do for Baal worship? Moloch and Baal, they would sacrifice babies. Right? So if someone's participating in Baal worship, right? Someone's participating in Baal worship, it's like, hey, who's got a kid, right? And they would do various ways, but they would literally think, I have to sacrifice and kill kids. Very interesting. Very interesting. It's this. I'm not going to apologize for bringing this up because I do believe this is such a huge cultural issue today, and it was back then. And I think it shows us that this issue of killing kids in the womb, is that something that just suddenly came about after Roe v. Wade in the 70s? Is that something like, oh, we should kill kids in the womb? Where did that begin? Where do we see it? As long as we go back in history, there's always been a history of, well, let's kill babies. That's disturbing, right? This isn't gospel, this isn't the Bible, but my opinion, guys, I think Satan, would you agree Satan's behind that? I think there's definitely some type of demon operation where Satan said, hey, your assignment for the rest of the ages, I want you to work on humans to convince them to kill the unborn or infants. Demon says, all right, that's my job. And for thousands of years, we've seen this demonic influence of all the way back here of, well, let's kill the unborn. Let's kill babies. Go back as far as you will. It's always been there. Crazy stuff. And so God tells him, you take down all of those idols. You take down the Baal and the Asherah. You take all those things down. But we see Gideon do something very interesting. Do you think Gideon says, yes, and in the middle of the day do it? Would you do that, right? If, by the way, do you think there's like a few people following Baal and Asherah? Do you think there's just a few Israelites doing that? Everyone's doing it, right? This is like a huge cultural thing. So culturally speaking, him tearing that down, is that going to be like a popular thing? Like, yeah, awesome, you tear that Baal down. I like that. Is that controversial? Yes. So you know what he does later? What does he do at night? He tears it down. Because why? I don't want Daddy to find out. I don't want my friends to find out. So there's a little shame involved. So versus going and being obedient, he goes at night and he tears these idols down. So he's kind of, is he like, God calls him right out of the gate? He's like, yes, I will do anything for you, Lord. No, he's kind of a chicken, right? Kind of a chicken. He's kind of feeling out. He's like, yeah, I'll do it, but I'm going to go back at night and do it, right? But then it's funny because his dad finds out. They end up finding out, Gideon, you're the one that actually tore down the idols. We're going to kill you. But then, classic dad, he's a good dad. Gideon's dad says, well, if Asherah is so powerful, can't Asherah speak for himself? Let him decide what he wants to do to Gideon. And they say, okay. Do you think anything happens? No, because it's an idol, right? It's just a piece of wood or a piece of stone, right? It doesn't do anything. So he gets out of that one. But then not only that, but we see Gideon do something very cool and kind of funny. He asks for a sign. Any of you guys ask for a sign from God? Right? I used to do this when I was younger. When I was thinking about people to date or things I should do, I'd be like, God, I just need a sign. And I'm almost expecting to look up in the clouds and like see like a cross or something. Or, we've done this before, right? We've all just, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you. That's pretty good, actually. All right. Right? I just need a sign. Right? Gideon, he's getting ready for battle. The Amalekites, the Midianites, they come out. They're getting ready for battle. And classic Gideon, he's already done this once before with God. He says, God, just give me a sign. And he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay out some fleece. I'm going to lay out some wool, right, out on the ground. And here's what I want you to do the first time. I want you, and guys, correct me and see if the order's right. I think the first time he says, I want the fleece to be wet, and I want the ground to be dry. Or is that the other way around? Forget. Is that right? Okay. All right. So I want the fleece to be wet, and I want the ground to be dry from the morning dew, right? You guys walking across the grass up there, that's morning dew, if you didn't know what that was, right? Okay? And so God's like, if he were talking today, he'd be like, bet, right? And so, guess what happens? He said, should I go out and conquer the Amalekites and the Gideonites? Because I just want to make sure you're with me. So I'm going to lay out this fleece, and it's going to happen this way. God says, okay, what do you think happens? It happens. Now, would that be good enough for you? I'd be like, sure, that's good. But is that good enough for Gideon? He reverses it. He said, all right, just in case I missed something or the weather was a little weird today, the meteorologist got it wrong, I want to reverse that. So now I want the ground to be completely wet and I want the fleece to be dry. And again, if I'm God, I'd be like, you're such an idiot. But God says, okay. And it happens exactly that way. The ground's wet, the fleece is dry. And he gets his signs. And he finally does it, right? God's patient with us, right? We see Gideon. He's not jumping out of the gate saying, yes, I will obey. Yes, I will obey. He keeps looking for signs. And God keeps working with him on it. But what would have been better for Gideon just to just go for it, right? He just wants him to go for it. He wants him to go for it, and he wants him to go and do what he's supposed to do. But God's going to give you those signs if you need them, right? Obedience is better. It's better if God says, do something, to do it, right? That is your sign. By the way, what's the best sign that you could ask for? This thing, right? This is the best sign you could ask for, right? And what I mean by that is you got to know the character of God. You got to know who he is. 3 things, okay? You guys write these down. I've asked you to write them down before, but pull out your phone, all right? If you don't get anything else today, pull out your phones. You think I'm kidding. Pull out your phones, all right? Write these things down, okay? These things will save you guys a lot of time, a lot of effort. 3 ways to know the will of God. If you're ever if you're sick of looking up in the sky, looking for a cloud to part, or if you're waiting for an audible voice of the Lord to come, does God usually operate that way? No, he doesn't seem to operate that way. And it's because he's given us his word. So the first thing you need to do, and you're not going to like this because you're like, but Trevor, that's too much work. That means I'm going to have to wake up 5 minutes earlier before school, or I don't care, but I'm just going to tell you, all right? Read the Bible. If you want to know the will of God, you have to read the Bible. He's told you things you need to do in there. For instance, people, and I see Christians mess this up all the time. Kids say, Trevor, I want to date this person. And I ask them, that's awesome. Who are they? Well, they're such and such. And I say, do they love Jesus? I don't know. Like, what? You haven't even asked them that? That should be your first question, guys. And then they find out, well, they're not a Christian. And I want to know if I should date them. And in a very loving way, what I try and do is say, you don't need to ask God's will for that. You never need to ask God's will for that question. You want to know why? He's already said something about that. He's already said, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. So when people are like, but I just need the sign. It's here. You don't need to look. You don't need to wait for the cloud to part. You don't need to wait for that, I don't know, that whatever it is, right? It's already there. So you need to know your Bible so when you think these things or hear these things, you're like, oh yeah, he already talked about that. Good. You need to pray. Read the Bible. You need to pray. And again, you guys are like, oh man, this is getting worse and worse, right? For real. God talks to us through his word, and I'm trying to teach my girls this. Like, I'm trying to teach them, like, well, God, I can't, or God, Trevor, I can't, Daddy, I can't see Jesus. Yeah, if my kid calls me Trevor, I'm like, excuse me? It's like, Daddy. They call me Daddy. Daddy, Amelia's really honest. She's like, Daddy, I can't see Jesus. I'm like, that's right. It's because he's in heaven preparing a place for you. Right? I'm like, got out of that one. She's like, but I can't hear him. What would you say? Where does God speak? The Bible, it's his word. It's not just something we say like, word. No, it's his word. Right? And I'm trying to teach my daughters. This is how you hear God speak. You need to know the voice of God, and it comes through knowing his word. And then if you want to talk to God, that's prayer. You need to talk to God about things. You need to process things. You need to process, just like we were talking about earlier. What's going on? Where are you? Where have you been? I don't feel like you're in my life. You need to have honest conversation with God throughout your time and through what you're going through. And then the final thing, you need to get godly counsel. And again, I emphasize godly counsel because you can get crappy counsel, right? And there is such a thing. You need to get counsel from people who are wiser than you, who are older than you, who love the Lord. Because just because someone's older, that doesn't mean they're wiser, right? You need to get counsel from people who know what they're talking about, who know the Bible. Maybe you're missing something. They're like, well, what about this? Or have you thought about this? Or I did that once. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Those three things will help you determine the will of God. You don't need to lay out a fleece like Gideon and be like, let me test this, right? If you guys are going to go out tonight and try that, you're probably going to be disappointed, okay? If you're not, please tell me, all right? I want to know what you're doing. So for us, guys, let's take courage that God uses people that are normal, that are less than normal, weird, abnormal. Maybe you feel like that. Maybe you don't feel like, man, I'm the best of the best. Maybe you don't feel that way. You're in good company. God uses you. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord. He will lift you up. He will raise you up, just like he did Gideon. And we're going to see Gideon go on to do some amazing things, and God's going to give him some more pushing and shoving a little bit to get him out of his comfort zone. But we're going to see God do some pretty cool stuff with Gideon. So we're going to